You're listening to The Pound, Confederation College Radio.
The views and opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of this station and/or Confederation College.
Well, welcome to Spirit Canoe, our Indigenous Issues program here at Confederation College, broadcasting from On Camp TV Live. And I've got my name is Bob Goujon, by the way. I guess I should pop that in. I have three guests this evening. And first of all, I want to go around the table and welcome everyone. Joy Asham, she is a writer. Welcome to the program, Joy. Joy, you may be familiar with. She writes the Anishinaabeg Voice column for the Chronicle Journal. Brenda Small. Brenda, former dean of Nagonawan College, for people who are unfamiliar. Nagonawan was, I guess, we might describe it as a college within the college, and you were the dean of that internal organization. It's now the objectives of Nagonawan have been taken over by the college as a whole.
That's the
plan.
That's the idea.
Well, we should monitor that.
Yes, we will.
On this show, this would be the perfect place to keep those feet close to the fire.
Okay.
That sound good?
That. Yes.
But now, currently, you're the vice president of
the Center for Policy in Aboriginal Learning.
Right. So,
which means we do research, and we also, out of the research, comes policy development.
Right.
So we've just started up since last April.
Right. And Leslie McGregor, who is the Associate Dean of the Learning Resource Division. Associate Dean of the Mouthful. the Learning Resource Division at the Confederation College.
That sounds about right.
We like long titles in the college.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. So, so welcome all. So we were going to start with Leslie because there's something coming up just around the corner this Saturday at Marina Park called Madadazi.
And so that's, we're very excited. It's the first ever joint Aboriginal post-secondary education orientation, and it'll be at Marina Park. So joint is Lakehead University, Confederation College, and then a bunch of other...
sorry, I forgot to... There we go.
There's the beautiful... I have it right here.
2014 Post-Secondary Student Orientation.
Yes. So the college obviously had its student orientation this week. The university has its student orientation next week. So that's why they're doing it on Saturday, so we can combine the both for all the students that are moving to Thunder Bay. Right. It's going to be at the Marina Park. It's from 12 to 5. It started off as a group like Confederation College and Lakehead University and their Aboriginal departments working together to come up with different things that we could do jointly. And while they were at this like cross-sectional meeting, they both were talking about orientation, and they said, why don't we have one together? Then the city totally got involved, totally backed it up. And then I don't want to get this wrong, so I'm going to tell you and look at this. The other collaborators are Oshki Pamachewin, Lakehead University, I said already.
What's Oshki? Anybody know?
It's the
go ahead.
Training and Education Institute that has been established by the Anishinaabe Aski Nation communities. Mm-hmm. So it's an Aboriginal institute, as they are known in Ontario. And they've been around for quite a number of years now.
Mm-hmm. Okay. They offer all different types of programming. Abongmatoon First Nation, Fort William First Nation, Matawa Education, and Northern Anishinaabe Education Council, and 7Gen.
Right, Seven Generation Institute.
Yeah.
Right.
So all of these, they're funders.
Now, is 7 Generation here? I know they're at Fort Francis. But
no,
they're also
here.
Okay.
There's an office right downtown Fort William.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they all are already involved with the college and the university all the time. They're here. They come to see their students. They come, to help solve problems, all those things. So they are 100% behind this. The interesting thing is the speakers that are coming, and we're super excited. I have a little agenda. I don't know if you want to know some of the names of the people that are coming.
Oh, sure, yeah. Bob Canoe for one.
That's the entertainment.
That's the headlining.
Yeah, that's the headlining of the entertainment.
These are the celebrities.
Those are the celebrities. But to start off, to show their support for what we're doing, It'll be starting off with Chief Georgianne Morso,
Oh, okay.
then Mayor Keith Hobbs, then Regional Grand Chief Stan Beardy, Chief of Police J.P. Levesque, President Brian Stevenson from Lakehead University, Executive Director Rosie Mosquito, and that's of Oshkosh Pamwachewen, Jim Matter, President of Confederation College. Those are everyone is going to give some type of address to the Aboriginal students at the Marina Park. So
And
we're very
everyone's welcome.
excited. Everyone's welcome. Doesn't matter, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, please come. Families, children, cousins, uncles, whoever. Everyone is welcome that day.
Right. So, in terms of the celebs,
Oh, so then we have comedian Ron Knutsky, musician Sarah Knutsky, and musician Nick Sherman. The headliner, though,
there you go. In capital letters, I noticed.
is Wob Canoe, the keynote speaker. And we are so excited that he has agreed to come to Thunder Bay to do this.
Good spokesperson.
Yeah, very good.
And Madadizi, my understanding is to start a journey.
That's exactly. That's what those words mean. It was probably, I think it was someone
Which
from
is appropriate
first,
for students starting out.
Yeah, and I think it was someone from first
Could have
gen.
called the show Madadizi, because
Yes.
we're starting a journey here,
Yes.
I guess.
What part of the park is it going to be in?
The main area where they'll have it all set up. There's like all kinds of organizations throughout the city that are also going to be set up there. So it's not just the college and university. You know, anyone who wants to showcase something for students. For example, of course, transit will be there, and I don't know exactly, but they have They have like tons of people from Thunder Bay going there to share their whatever services or knowledge. There'll also be artisans. There'll be, people selling stuff, food, all that kind of stuff. So it should be a pretty exciting day.
Good. Good. I was thinking I might go down there with my cameras and see if I can grab a clip or two of something. I don't know. That's just, who knows
Yeah.
how that might work out.
And I think this is a really good message for the people of Thunder Bay and Northwestern Ontario that Aboriginal students certainly make a huge difference in our city in terms of our makeup as a city and our growth in the future. And the fact that some students have had difficulties over the years in making a transition to the city, or the city not being as responsive as the population could be with respect to inviting young Aboriginal people to the city who are starting off at college or university. There's also the issue of safety and the acknowledgement that some students have had some very sad and tragic things happen. So we need to make sure that there's a very strong welcome and a message of support for Aboriginal students when they come to Thunder Bay. Because we've had stories, we've learned stories about people not having such a great experience here.
Wow. I look forward to that.
Yes.
I'm going to try to get down there. Never
Okay,
know.
that'd be great.
Yeah.
And just to add one little other highlight is that from Confederation College, from our Apawin Center, which is our Aboriginal Student Lounge, we'll have Chris and Darby, who are Aboriginal student navigators. They are really at the heart of this. They're the ones that, have been really working hard. They're so excited. They're making tons of things happen from Confederation College, and I'm positive there's a lot of people at Lakehead University and that are doing the same thing. But for our two, they're amazing. They're going to be there all day. If you do come down, you have to go meet Chris. You have to go meet Darby, because they are the faces of our Aboriginal
Kind of the
student
gatekeepers
services.
to your navigating your path through the college life.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, good. Well, thank you very much for coming in.
You're welcome.
Last minute.
Yes.
So we're going to take a little break, just 30 seconds or so, and we'll play musical chairs.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm waiting to hear the music coming on, and we can.
Thank you very much for having me.
Chosen one.
Alrighty, we are back, and we have a bit of panel, as I've said off the top of the show. My name is Bob Goujon, and I'm speaking here with Joy Asham and Brenda Small. And we've got a few topics of discussion for this evening. And the first was something that's got a fair amount of attention in the last week or two, which, I mean, I can isolate it down to a specific event of sorts, but it's obviously a much longer. And that is that Stephen Harper, when he was on his northern tour recently, gave a conference and news conference, and he made the following remarks. So let's first of all we'll just watch this clip, and this will kind of set the stage.
Good morning. There seems to be a groundswell growing with the recent death of 15-year-old Tina Fontaine, who was pulled from the Red River in Winnipeg in a bag. We do know about the programs your government has given to various organizations, and there seems to be a universal call for a national inquiry into murdered and missing women from police and social services agencies. Why won't you consider this?
It's very clear that there has been very fulsome study of this particular, of these particular things. They're not all one. They're not all one phenomenon. Obviously, in the particular case you talk about, we want to extend all of our sympathies to the victims' families and friends. This is a terrible crime, clearly a crime, but first and foremost, it is a crime. And the most important thing is to make sure we have a thorough police investigation. That is now ongoing. I'm not going to comment on the police investigation, but as the RCMP has said itself in its own study, the vast majority of these cases are addressed and are solved through police investigations, and we'll leave it in their hands. Also, we're also making, as you know, some additional investments to try and prevent some of these situations. But as I say, I think we should not view this as sociological phenomenon. We should view it as crime. It is crime against innocent people, and it needs to be addressed as such. We brought in laws across this country that are having more effect in terms of crimes of violence against not just Aboriginal women, but women and persons more generally, and we remain committed to that course of action.
Thank you. Merci.
So that was a clip, of some remarks by Stephen Harper. This would have been, well, that was back on August 21st. Excuse me. So this became the occasion for some discussion. And I'm not sure if you're all aware, but there's a few things. I'll just mention the things that have recently caught my eye. There was a letter, which was in the paper, from Ezra Levant. I don't know if you're familiar with Ezra Levant, the columnist who writes from time to time. In his, I mean, I'm going to paraphrase, but his argument was this is basically Aboriginal male violence on Aboriginal females. So the solution is to deal with that. And his second remark was that when Aboriginal peoples show up in the courtroom, they're given a kind of a discount and let out early, and so there's your problem right there. So violent Aboriginal males just need to be locked up and kept locked up. That was that's my paraphrase of the Ezra Levant situation or letter. Then more recently, you may be aware that the provincial premiers were meeting as part of the their annual conference, and this was the highlight of their first day. They had a kind of a 2-day session, and I understand that some Aboriginal leaders were there. So they have taken this up, and this became a kind of a catalyst of sort, I think, not all by itself, but they clearly want to see something. If they're now talking, if not a national inquiry, a round table, as whatever the distinction exactly might be, and it's being discussed. I tend to watch Power and Politics with Evan Solomon on a daily basis, and it's been hitting those shows fairly regularly the last couple of weeks. Mind you, they had a panel just I think it was yesterday or the day before, and Jeff Norquay, who tends to be the conservative voice, conservative voice on these panels was more or less repeating what Ezra Levant was saying. This is just Aboriginal male violence on Aboriginal women, and that's where the problem needs to be solved. He got a lot of criticism from the other people on the panel. That's just to kind of set the stage, right? This is kind of where the discussion is. It seems that CBC, for example, who I've been watching, is reporting that there seems to be now some movement. Justice Minister McKay and Aboriginal Minister Bernie Valcourt has come out and shown, okay, well, we don't want a national inquiry, but if the provinces decide that they would like to have a roundtable and the First Nations leaders decide that they would like to have a roundtable, well, if, and this was the condition that seemed to be put in place by Bernard Valcourt, if it's going to be not just sitting around chatting and producing pieces of paper, but there's going to actually be action, then we'd be happy to sit in. So there seems to be, the CBC is reporting this is now movement on the part of the minister. Right? Anyways, this is to kind of just lay the groundwork, right? Just put down a kind of what seems to be happening in the last few weeks. Now, I guess we can discuss that specifically, or we can just step back and say, okay, is this maybe just I'll put a question. That's usually easier if I put a question. What do you make of Stephen Harper's remark that it's not a sociological phenomenon? What do you think the significance of that remark is? First of all, what do you think he's saying?
First of all, I should say that I was in Ottawa and at Parliament on one of the days that Stephen Harper was wearing a red tie, and so was his assistant, and they did not allow anybody else to wear a red tie. Basically what I'm saying is Stephen Harper is into marketing, into his own brand. His own brand is very much involved with economic development as opposed to humanity in general. That's a general statement. I'd also like to say that we ancients, I go back a long way, and I go back to the early 70s in Winnipeg. These were issues in Winnipeg in the early 70s. What I saw as I worked with women and children in the core area of Winnipeg is I saw people coming in from outside communities and compounding the problems that already existed there and leeching off of the grief that community suffered. Everything from slum landlords who happened to be city councillors through to people that were coming in and grabbing young Native women for, sexual perversions of sorts. I personally have a friend whose mother was a missing person from a long time ago. So this is not a problem that has just, even though we're discussing it now, one of the things that has happened is that residential school system was not an issue until people started talking about it, yet it had been going on for a very long time. We're finally starting to see the tip of the iceberg emerge, and it would be a shame if it submerged again, because I do not believe, although I do know that there's lateral violence in our communities, I do not believe that the main perpetrators are from within our own community. I also want to fault the research. When one does research, there are several different things that you have to look at. One is, a lot of things you cannot identify by race because it's self-volunteered. Another thing is that if you do proper research, you don't just go to one agency to find that out, whether that's the RCMP or the city police or whatever. You do across the board search and see if your tertiary and secondary information, supports and or denies certain theories that exist. So the RCMP have been found to be culpable in some of these incidents. And to me, that's sort of like going to the horse and asking, asking what the horse's opinion is. And I find the fact that our country is led by somebody who's much more concerned about image than about reality. That is the basic problem that we have. Constantly what happens is the problem is never correctly identified. Let's put another Band-Aid on. I think it's time that we started solving problems in a real and meaningful way. As Aboriginal people are burgeoning as was mentioned in the lead into this show, we have an incredible economic impact these days. And it's about time that we had decision-making power, the same sort of securities and protections of everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that, you know, I do concur with what Joy has said. This has been going on for many, many years in the country, across the whole country. Certainly Winnipeg is a prime example historically. And there's been a lot of progress made in Winnipeg and in Manitoba, and that's largely due to the advocacy work of the Aboriginal people in Winnipeg. And certainly across the country, we can say that there are hot spots where this occurs. You know, you can look at places like Regina, Saskatoon, downtown Eastside, and Vancouver, etc. But we're also talking about places like Thunder Bay. We're talking about places in Ontario where there are large numbers of Aboriginal people who then the young people in particular who are coming from maybe the outlying areas are much more vulnerable to the kinds of predatory behaviors that exist in a city. Mm-hmm. So I do think that this is a
and there has been a
long-standing-
call for,
Yes.
I'm not sure, inquest or whatever,
Yes.
looking at the, now this has been stalled, if I recall correctly, because of the jury roles. There was a lack of representation, and it got kind of stalled on that issue recently, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong on that.
There is some discussion about that, and there's been an attempt, and I think former Supreme Court of Canada Justice Yakabuchi did do a report, and we did have some representation from Northern Ontario through Anishinaabe Nation on the discussion about juries and representation. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly not addressed yet, but I know there are people working on that. But certainly this is an ongoing discussion and problem in the country. And I think certainly I'm not directly a sociologist, but one of my undergraduate degrees is in sociology. And certainly we do know that this is a phenomenon that has occurred, and that there are numerous reports and studies that demonstrate that this is indeed the case.
Well, and that's what there has been. I just read a couple of reports in the last day or two where the news papers are reporting that these reports to which he's referring contradict what he's saying. That it is a sociological phenomenon. All the reports say that.
Right.
But so I kind of want to get just a little more focused then on what you think you alluded to marketing, Joy. What's the ploy here? What's the tactic? What's the objective of? I mean, I'm going to offer some observation about what I suspect he doesn't want to get into. Why calling it a crime and not a sociological phenomenon keeps it constrained in terms of its implications. Now, you may not have had the good fortune of listening to Karen Drake and I talking about treaties last week, but one of the things that came out of our discussion, talking about the treaties and how basically Indigenous peoples came to the treaty table looking for protection of traditional territories, traditional activities, hunting and fishing and so on, when in fact the treaties were written up as just the opposite. You're giving away all your rights and your land and everything else to us. And we are going to be, is the way the Confederation story writes up the treaties more or less, we are the exclusive authority in the country. So when he's saying, when I hear him saying, oh, well, this is just crime, we don't want to talk about colonialism because that may well be part of this story. Mm-hmm. He doesn't want to go there. Now, in my mind, of course, I go all the way and in the sense that colonialism, you know, he's not the unilateral source of authority that the Confederation story purports that he is. He wants to live inside that story for sure. He's the federal first minister in a federated country, political system, and First Nations really are just petitioning that state. Because if he ventures out beyond into, well, what's the source of it? What are the root causes? Well, you're going to be into the story of colonialism. And he just doesn't seem to be a person or a politician, and he's not alone. There's many of them, don't seem to want to open up that topic of discussion.
Well, I would like to say something that is extremely wrong about the political system, and that is that people think in a very small box of 3 to 4 years. We must think much longer because if we go back right to, let's say, Confederation and the driving of the last spike into the railway, there were 3 Chinese workmen that had contributed to the building of the railroad that were airbrushed out of that very famous picture. We happen to have been colonized by people who, if one was from upper society in Britain, babies were taken away from their mother and given to a wet nurse. There wasn't even any bonding at that stage. And then you go from there to not being able to join people at the table because you're not in long pants yet. And as soon as you get to a certain age, then you're sent away to boarding school. These are the people that in turn enforce treaties on us. I'm just going to digress into my own family for a minute because I want to talk about my name, which I've talked to you about before. The name Asham comes from my grandfather was a leader within the area around Selkirk, Manitoba, which is now known as Peguis 1A. I come from Peguis 1B, but that's because that is now up in the Interlake region of Manitoba. But for a long time, those people resisted signing the treaty. And they resisted, and of course they were herded into smaller patches of land. They couldn't fish anymore, they couldn't hunt anymore, they were being starved to death. One of our now considered traditions is bannock, and it comes from starvation food. That's what we were given instead of, the organ meats of game. So anyway, my grandfather, actually I think it was my great-grandfather, looked around and said, "If you will feed them, I will sign the treaty." They were particularly after him because they knew he could influence other people to sign the treaty. So in his language he said Asham, which means feed them. And that is how our family got their language. So we're into, our last name. So the whole process has been a coercion. Mm-hmm. We've been protected to death. We have, so we are now coming into a society that doesn't understand that it's not just this generation that is experiencing these things. It's generation upon generation. And within that, we've lost an awful lot of things that it's going to be really hard for us to regain, and it has to be long term. Mm-hmm. This particular situation with the murdered and missing women, as I mentioned earlier, did not happen overnight. Has not just become a phenomena of the last few months. It's been going on for a very long time. Only now are we talking about it. But there's so many other issues that are going to continue to arise as long as some underlying conditions are not looked at. And that's where I come from, the sociological perspective of I don't aspire to be part of the dominant culture, because if the dominant culture means I have to be torn away from my baby, if it means I have to send my children off to school, if it means all of those things just so I can succeed, then to me, success is sitting around my kitchen table having tea out of peanut butter jars with people I love. Mm-hmm. And that is very much different than insisting that nobody else wear a red tie.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's say that, oh, sorry, did you?
No, I'm listening.
I guess I just, there's something about the Stephen Harper legacy on this point that I find a little hard to understand. And I guess it's because of the apology. It was in 2009, I believe it was. Now, my understanding is that it was, in fact, Jack Layton who approached him and said, I think you should do this. Because that's, in fact, what Stephen Harper said after the fact. But it's very hard for me. I stumble on this point, and we've discussed this before. How can you say that, or apologize? I mean, I guess my problem is I don't understand then what he's apologized for. I mean, is it just the limited circumstances, if I can use those words, of some of the things, abuses that occurred at residential schools, but it's not really an apology for the residential school policy in general, which was colonial? Because he doesn't seem, and he's not alone, the regime he had seems to basically be acting out this point of view is there was no colonialism in Canada. So there's no need. That's why there's no sociological phenomenon. Because to acknowledge a sociological phenomenon is start to acknowledge colonialism, and then presumably if you're apologizing for colonialism, then what's the solution, right? Or what are the implications and what are the consequences? If you're just apologizing for a little bit of physical and sexual abuse that took place with individuals, then the solution is one thing. But if if in fact what you're apologizing is colonialism, then the solution is very different. For example, the form of governance. Questions start to come up. I mean, how come we have this form of governance given the history of the country? Now, I don't know what his motivation is, but the thing that comes to my mind all the time is he doesn't want to go there. He doesn't want to deal with colonialism. He doesn't want to deal with the political implications. He doesn't want to deal with the exclusive form of government that Confederation attempted to set up. He doesn't want to go down the path of dealing with the question of its legitimacy. Because the fact is that there are some serious questions. If you actually look at the history of the treaties and so on, there's some very serious questions about the legitimacy of his title as Prime Minister of an exclusive form of governance in Canada. And by keeping it narrowly pitched to, it's just a crime, we're not going to deal with sociological issues, we don't have to raise the thorny questions that come with all the things that you're discussing, which is the colonial past. Because it ultimately strikes at the heart of what Ottawa and Toronto, what their story is. So, I mean, that's how I interpret it. So it's understandable that those institutions simply don't want to go there, because to go there is self-undermining. So they're doing everything they can to stop from going down that path. That's how I interpret it. I don't know what your thoughts might be on that.
Well, I think that your analysis is certainly something that other folks have brought forward, and it's been discussed. Certainly in a lot of academic environments, this is a conversation that's ongoing. I do, though, think that many people in Canada believe that their history is the accurate representation.
You mean Ottawa and Toronto's version is the accurate, right?
Exactly, yeah, and Canadians generally speaking.
Well,
don't know colonialism existed, don't know that Canadian society is impacted by colonialism as well.
Well, and of course we're in an educational institution, and it's a provincially run operation, and its curriculum is set, where.
Yes.
I mean, in general, historically speaking.
There's a degree, though, of independence at the post-secondary level. We can say that, certainly.
Well, I guess what I was going to say is that generally over the last 150 years, educational policy has been pursuing achieving the colonial ends of the colonial governments.
Yes.
That's what it was set up to do.
Yes.
And so we're now in this phase where we're trying, some of us, to undo that.
And I think it would be interesting to see what Canadians do about colonialism.
Well, first of all, we'll have to discuss it.
Yeah, when we're the ones who are raising it, we've been impacted by it, but are Canadians talking about it?
Mm-hmm. I think in Ottawa and Toronto, no. In Thunder Bay, yes. For just the reasons you're referring to. It's now part of the curriculum of both the college and university. There's Aboriginal learning objectives in every class. And, so it's kind of happening in that sense.
Maybe in popular culture, though, it hasn't caught on. And that's where the conversation really needs to take place at the citizenry level, in grassroots settings, in community. Thunder Bay is a fairly big city for Northern Ontario, but I don't know if we're actually having that conversation about colonialism in Thunder Bay.
Mm-hmm. I've had some very strange conversations with people, and I'm starting to understand that with the economic times being what they are, with people, instead of having a full-time job, maybe running back and forth between two part-time ones, and or having grievous poverty, that there seems to be a willingness to blame, and B, they have the need to oversimplify what's going on. Now, for example, I was speaking with somebody during the time of the Idle No More campaign, and she said to me, what I don't understand is this. if in fact the housing is so bad in that community, the education is so bad in that community, why doesn't the chief, who's making lots of money, do the housing herself? And I said, well, does anybody ever ask Keith Hobbs to, to do social housing? I mean, the parallels between, like a small municipality and a reserve First Nation can be considered to be somewhat the same. So there's not a thinking through of, like cause and effect. And I think that that's what Aboriginal people are really good at, and you can see it in our humor. For example, I went up to Sandy Lake. Now, this is years and years ago. This is back when the Wawate Native Communications Society was just getting into community radio. I go up there, and I was chartering with the Ministry of Natural Resources, and I was asked to land the plane at the Tomahawk Store dock, where I would be met by the Chief and Council. Anyway, I got off the plane, and the dock looked like it had just been cut down out of the bush. It had bark on it, everything else lashed together. And as I'm walking along that dock, I looked down, and somebody had carved in there, "Made in Japan." And then I got into the community, and I realized that this was the beginning of the, cultural recession on our part, because all the kids were plugged into Walkman. And it was after that, the TV, et cetera, came up north, and we saw a huge impact on our culture because of that. I'm not saying we shouldn't have access to these things, but what I'm saying that we have to understand, issues are very, very complex. They didn't necessarily have to be, but when something starts out wrong and continues to be layered, then you have to start getting complex in your solutions. The first thing we have to do is to be able to sit down at the table as equals. Not have to petition everybody for representation, not have to set up our separate agencies that, for example, in the mental health industry locally here, of which we should be, it should be accessible to us, especially with the history of post-traumatic stress disorder. But the mainstream agencies are given tons and tons of money, and then our mental health resources are cut back and cut back. Why in the world, I'm kind of on the outside of the college and the university, but I want some type of monitoring done to make sure that those aren't just, nice little goals that are set down, but in fact, they are being achieved. I want measuring sticks. I want ways of saying, yes, not only did we enroll 25% more Native students this year, but 50% more graduated. I'm tough.
That's okay. Well, just go back to the point about how does colonialism become an issue that the general population identifies with? Yay or nay, right? At this point, generally doesn't, as I say, I don't think people in Toronto or Ottawa, it's just not part of their story. It's not the story they're living in. And whereas I tend to refer to us as the peoples of the bush, and I mean everybody outside, from Mattawa to North Bay to Thunder Bay to, that there is a kind of a shared experience. And trying to understand what that is and what its political implications are. Because as we all know, and you talk to anybody in these towns for 5 minutes and, Toronto and Ottawa. And, in other words, people have internalized their relationship to the imperial, what I would call the imperial centers, right, over a long history. So on the one hand, it strikes me that people are ripe for understanding that, maybe there's a notion of self-governance, as I would say, in the bush. And that they have maybe more potential rights than benefits in the long run if they were to, if you like, confer and gather around that principle of self-governance in the bush, and not be, because it's not just Aboriginal peoples in the bush who are being exploited by the imperial system that was set up in 1867. It was set up to benefit certain interests. Generally, they were, organized and headquartered in those days it was Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa. And the economic system and the political system was built to pursue and achieve certain ends. And the peoples in the mineral-rich areas, white or native or non-native, were part of the system. So I guess, again, that's a bit of a simplification, but it's getting at the idea that people may not be, by identifying or just simply assuming that the Toronto-Ottawa version of our story, the one single source of authority in the country, is necessarily the version that's to everybody's benefit. So trying to start to tell that alternative story, that not only is the notion of self-governance in the regions, if you like, or in the bush, to the benefit of Indigenous peoples, but it may well be to the benefit of all peoples living in the region. And what does that look like? So when the mayor, for example, and Georgianne Morisseau are sitting down and together and saying, well, we have to accomplish things together, that's the beginning of understanding that other perception of how we achieve things and what our goals might be, as opposed to the colonial structure, which is dictated from somewhere else. Does that make sense to anyone?
I think that's like what is needed is shifting the paradigm.
Right.
And those sitting down together and talking is a beginning. It's not the end, but it's the beginning. I just wanted to say, like, that there's several things that all of us are victims of. And one of them is that when government is way up here and the politicians start getting all this money together for elections, they start doing things that, I don't know whether you remember back, what was it, 10, 15 years ago, maybe even a little bit longer than that, everything was all the fault of the immigrants. And that's how no longer the progressive conservatives, but the conservatives. I think it's neat that they lost that progressive name. Doesn't that say something? It's just in and of itself. But that is how they got so much power in the first place, was standing on the immigrants. People then said, immigrants are taking my job. Okay, do you want to go stoop work and pick strawberries in southern Ontario? I don't think so. I've done it. I've done tobacco picking. Like, people do not, mainstream Canadians do not want to do that kind of work. Okay? Okay, so you have, like this whole thing about there has to be the creation of an enemy. At this point in time, I think, especially in areas such as northwestern Ontario, it seems to be Native people that are the focus. In other large urban centers, as you've mentioned, Brenda, and other places where all of a sudden it's becoming visible that Aboriginal people are moving ahead. In spite of, like somebody once said to me that our ancestors had to be geniuses for us to still exist. When you consider all of the things that have happened, had to be geniuses. Further thing I wanted to mention is people wonder how the situation in North America rose. I happen to think that some of it has to do with the adversarial system that is based on what they call Lockean law. Is that correct? And basically, Lockean law is based on the fact, or one of the beliefs in Lockean law is that it was okay to make slaves of black people because when they resisted being captured and brought over here, they actually became prisoners of war, so you can do anything you want to them. And out of that came what is supposedly the justice system in North America. And we have to, though, start looking at restorative justice. We have to start looking at why Aboriginal people, and it's not because they're violent or worse than anybody else, end up being such a large part of the prison population. We also have to understand that the prison these days is also substituting for what used to be known as the poorhouse. People go there because maybe they have been, put in a position that they don't have any choices or very few choices. I'm not excusing all behavior, especially not violence. To me, violence is not an excusable thing. But when you consider, like we're not criminals, we're not, but we certainly are stuck at the very bottom of the economic ladder.
Mm-hmm.
And until such time as we start moving up that, then I don't think that we can ever have the respect of politicians just strictly because those are the ways that they classify people.
Right. Well, and the thing is, I guess I'm inclined to observe that there's a reason why Indigenous peoples were pushed to the bottom of the economic and political ladder because, well, long and short of it, they were in the way. Even according to British law, they owned the land. So that was the principal fashion in which they, as I like to tell my students, you can't make money selling land to the people who already own it. So if you're going to make money selling land, and that's the Confederation business model in a nutshell, you're going to have to push the people who own it out of the way so you can sell the land, so you stuff it with people from somewhere else. That immigration model of imperialism wasn't unique to Canada. Scots were moved into Ireland, and when they were pushed off during the enclosure movement, they were pushed off the land in Scotland, and they were used to pacify the problems in Ireland. I mean, in other words, that shifting use of immigration as an imperial policy was standard operating procedure. Well, so I guess the point I'm trying to get at is there's to go down the road of acknowledging that opens up a can of worms that political system in Ottawa and Toronto doesn't want to open. And that's when I hear Stephen Harper saying, well, it's not a sociological phenomenon. He's once again saying, look, let's just keep it down to this really, really, really narrow thing that we can, throw a little money at or whatever, but we're not going to mess around with the overall organization of the system. So unless we understand those reasons, we're going to say, because I'm sure when the average Canadian listens to Stephen Harper, oh, that sort of makes sense. Mm-hmm. But in the context of having any appreciation of colonialism, which includes at this point all the premiers and First Nations leaders who are coming and say, "What are you talking about? I mean, who are you trying to kid?" There's a story here, and you're obviously not willing to tell it. And then the question has to be asked, which kind of goes back to your point about marketing way back at the beginning. Why not? Why doesn't the current regime? And not just, I don't think it's just the current regime. Why do the institutions in Ottawa not want to? Those institutions have been around a long time. The government structure in Ottawa and Toronto has been around for 150 years. So they've been built on a certain set of presumptions, and their internal logic is to pursue certain courses of action. And I think he's in perfect keeping with what the strategy he's taking is very much in keeping with that story and those institutions. So to push them off that story and push them back, if you like, to historical reality, it is the case of connecting with people outside of those. That's why I referred earlier to there's a different experience for all those people who, from Mattawa to North Base to Thunder Bay to Kenora to Winnipeg to wherever. There's just as you've spoken about personal experiences that people have that just don't jive. But for the average person living in Ottawa who's living in an apartment in a stacked up building and goes to work and works in a cubicle and stares into a screen all day, this doesn't contradict anything in their life.
My half-sister happens to be somebody that was very much in keeping with the kind of beliefs that Harper espouses. And then her husband got sick and lost his business, and they ended up having to, what she said, go downtown. In other words, ask for some help. And that's when her eyes started to open. And I hope it doesn't take that for everyday Canadians to wake up and realize that they may be picked on by the foreman, or consider the foreman their enemy, but the foreman is also somebody who If they got fired tomorrow or laid off tomorrow, 6 months they're going downtown after their employment insurance runs out. People have to start realizing that we're all in the same boat, except for that, like upper crust of 2%. I also wanted to hark back on something else that I learned when I was in school, that it wasn't until I was much older that I started to realize the implications of this particular thing. And I'm just going to mention it. I'm not necessarily going to analyze it. But when Australia was first colonized by Britain, it was by prisoners. They eventually set up something called the Great White Australian Policy. And they did that because they figured they were too close to the Pacific Rim. And that all of a sudden, if they opened up the immigration doors to people of color, that they'd be flooded by Chinese, Japanese, Asians. And it took a really long time for that policy to go away. People sometimes don't understand that the historical rooting of things. How do you get people to agree that that's a good policy? Well, first of all, there's a process called pseudo-speciation, which means that I change you into something that isn't human. And once I call you a gook, once I call you a chink, whatever, then you're no longer human, so then I can do to you whatever I wish. And outright campaigns have been launched, usually just before a war. Gotta call them Krauts, they're not Germans because they're not real people. Just like the Nazis, in fact, turned Jewish people into what they called vermin. So we have to understand that nobody, after an invasion or a colonial encroachment on a country, ever goes back and says, oh, well, now we can consider them to be real people and put out the banners that Aboriginal people are real, that they're not just something below us that we can step on. So right now what we're doing is we're getting into what I call a violent spiral. And that means that I'm going to get a big stick. You're going to get a bigger stick. I'm going to get a bomb. You're going to get a nuclear bomb. And the next thing you know, there's nowhere to go. I would like us to understand that the intervention needs to be now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's so much I could say.
Yeah, no.
There are many things going through my head.
Right. We have 7 minutes, just by the way.
Yes, I know.
I've taken it all, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm enjoying
it's not the only 7 minutes. There's an hour a week.
It's an ongoing conversation.
It's an hour
right?
a week down the road.
We'll get to everything. No, I was just thinking about how calling it criminal is a way to separate it, put it over there. It's not important. These people or these conditions give rise to crime. That's not the rest of us. That kind of separation. I think that's what he was doing. I think that's what is going on.
Well, and I think it's a way, I guess, it's a way of putting it into his, crime and justice policy bucket.
Yeah, I'm not going to deal with it. It's over there.
It's in that
I have
bucket.
a minister who deals with that.
Right.
Don't bother me with this conversation.
Right. Yeah, he looked like, well, I don't want to speculate on his internal feelings, but he did look a bit like, oh God, here we go again.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so I guess the impetus for dealing with it is and it's. I mean, it is on the one hand heartening to see that the First Nations and for whatever reasons exactly, the premiers are on board pushing the agenda, because alternatively they might not. They could have said, well, we're not going to go there, just like the federal government seems not to want to go there.
Yeah.
So whatever the reasons exactly are, other than I suspect they're maybe a little closer to those communities and having to deal with it, I mean, the issues head on a little, because generally speaking, provincial jurisdiction is a little closer to the ground. That may be part of it. I don't know for sure. But at any rate, there seems to be something, I guess, behind the curtain, maybe put it that way, that requires more attention. And that's why this isn't just a one-show topic, that we need to peel back the onion here, because that's precisely what seems, that's my interpretation. He just doesn't want the onion being peeled. So whether this is going to be a roundtable or a national inquiry, it seems like the media and certain parties, at any rate, are prepared to start peeling the onion, and more importantly, in public. Which goes back to the point that we were discussing, which is the idea that the general public needs to be aware of the onion's layers, and they're generally not. And his strategy is presumably to keep it off the public agenda. That's it's just a crime issue. It's let the lawyers and the police deal with it. We're not going to have a public political discussion about this.
That would elevate it if they did.
Yeah, or just take up more public space
and money.
Well, and just shift the agenda, right? And put colonialism on the front burner as an issue requiring and begging our attention and our solutions.
Yeah.
Anyway, we got 3 minutes.
I was just going to say that what this particular issue is it's a symptom. It's not the problem. Okay, it's a terrible symptom. But it is not the problem until we start defining the problem and doing that intervention I talked about and start working together as humanity. If we set up, like which side is bigger, which side carries the bigger stick, I have the power, I can shut you up. We're not getting anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually all of us will move into that. So whether, the Chinese are moving in, whether it's Pakistanis, whether it's Aboriginal people, whether it's, at one point in time it was the Irish, it just goes around in circles and circles and circles. We have to intervene.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess the bottom line to me is it has to be the recognition and acknowledgement of the vital role of Indigenous peoples in the country, not just culturally, but economically and politically. And we have to, and I guess we have about a kind of 150-year hiatus. It's like we have a little black hole there that we have to leap across, because it's almost as if at the treaty table there was just a roadblock, and nothing evolved for 150 years in terms of the relationship between First Nations and non-First Nation folks in Canada as to what the form of governance would be. So in a sense, we have to leap across this huge gap to address the problem. We have 1 minute left.
We didn't get to talk about writing and Joy's work of her written work.
Yeah, no, that's going to be another show, right? That's.
I do have a book coming out around Christmas.
Oh, good.
Called "The Truths My Father Told Me."
Oh, wow. Okay, well, we'll definitely have you on to discuss that.
I can be a softer person.
Oh. You were pretty soft tonight. I'm not wearing any bruises. I think we came out fairly well. Anyways, I guess that does pretty much wrap it up. Just to say thank you for the folks who are turning in. You've been listening to myself, Bob Goujon. This is Spirit Canoe. We've had Joy Asham, writer here in Ottawa, and Brenda Small, who is here with the Confederation College in the Aboriginal Learning Program.
You used to live in Ottawa. Now you're in Thunder Bay. You said Ottawa.
Did I say Ottawa?
Yeah.
Oh, I did 15 years of radio down there.
We're in Thunder Bay.
I'm in Thunder Bay.
And we love being in Thunder Bay. Yeah. Thank you.
Miigwech.
Miigwech.
The views and opinions expressed in the following program do not necessarily reflect those of this station and/or Confederation College.
He always said he didn't get this song, but I